Welcome, everybody. I come to you today from DC in a different office. Welcome to the October 17th Language Barriers and Incarceration Status meeting. We will kick off at about 3 minutes past the hour, just as we let everybody filter in. It's nice to see you all. Hello, Kwesi.
How's everybody doing?
Pretty good. Had a long day. I've been in facilitation mode since early in the morning. And
Mm,
from the depths of the Department of Health and Human Services. So
Amen.
yeah.
We'll give you some grace and some love as you get ready to do a thing again. If
Okay.
I have to, when I go off camera, there's a little incident here at the campus that I'm attending to.
Okay. That's totally fair. We got each other's backs.
Right
So
on.
all right, we're going to start in just about a minute. Again, I'm Sarah DeSilvi, the Director of Terminology for Gravity. If you all don't know me, it is our October 17th public terminology call. We're heading into a new phase of our work, which is part of our cycle called end-to-end review, and we will kick off ever so shortly. Right, here we go. I want to start on time. I think there's like 70 slides today. There's a lot of material. Remember, most of it is just to familiarize you with the content of what you'll be seeing if you review the master when it's posted on Tuesday. Welcome to the October 17th Public Terminology Call. It's my honor to be here with our subject matter experts. All right, next slide. Thanks for joining. Everybody is muted upon entry, but feel free to come off mute, raise your hand, engage in the conversation. This is a community of practice, and we want to hear your voice. If you have comments, please put them in the chat to everybody. If you feel so inclined, you can put who you are and where you hail from in the chat as well. All of our calls are recorded, and the recordings are available on the Gravity Confluence afterwards. Next slide. We are, as a data standards initiative, we are bound to follow antitrust practices. So we have the responsibility to comply fully with federal and state antitrust laws. And just from a point of diligence, this means not only avoiding antitrust violations, but also anything that might be construed as such. So it's just part of the nature of our standards-based work, and we ask that you respect antitrust practices throughout the meeting. Next slide. So we have some brief announcements. Again, an overview of the 2025 plan, just a brief one. And then we're going to be going into end-to-end review. For those of you who have been around Gravity meetings for a while, this stage is familiar to you, but we'll describe what happens within it before we head into it. And then there is a host of concepts regarding language barriers and incarceration. And then there are a couple, there's like one slide regarding all domain revisions. So I'm going to be presenting content throughout, leaning heavily on the wisdom of our subject matter experts to lead any why. I'm grateful for our friend Kwesi, who's going to be helping with some of the why and the facilitation of any questions on what's within the incarceration status domain. Thanks for being here. Next slide. All right, next slide. Announcements, just a brief announcements. You know, we could have announced all the places we've been talking just today. Over the last 2 days, Gravity's been at Weedy, at the Civitas conference, and I'm here at HiTech, right? There's a lot of public engagement happening in the ecosystem, but specifically we want to mention regarding terminology work stream. It is the final run for the comments on our IC10 concepts for utility and security. Pathways to commenting on that can be found at the Confluence. We ask that you join us in our technical work stream meetings every Wednesday, Eastern Standard Time, 1 to 2. And then implementation work stream, that is on the 31st of October, the next one. We originally had a topic, and then that topic switched. So I'm slipping in to do a late-breaking topic on pathways to identifying whether your standardized instrument aligns with Gravity standards, and in parentheses, and correlating policies, because there's many policies in the ecosystems and regulations that point to Gravity. And so we get emails all the time about whether or not individuals' instruments align. So we're going to have an implementation meeting just on that topic. And then again, hopefully recorded, so that when people have questions in the future, we can point them to the webinar as an initial point of reference. And that's again, October 31st, 2:30 to 4 p.m. EST. Next slide. Any questions on the announcement slide? All right, and then I see I'm just looking at the different, we have Bernardo, we have Sarah, we have Monique, we have, just looking at our attendees today. Again, we have so many people at so many meetings. Next slide. All right, so we're going to quickly breeze through the Gravity slides, just for anybody who's not a Gravity familiar person. Gravity is a collaborative with a goal to develop consensus-driven data standards to support the collection, use, and exchange of data to address the social determinants of health. Next slide. Our members, we had to update our slides. Thank you so much, Sarah B, for doing that. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without our members, including many of our friends in the federal ecosystem, including where I come to you today. I'm sitting in the ASTP Associate Secretary for Technology Policy, Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy office right now, where I've been all day. And again, just grateful for our members and our designated members. Again, we operate from a social justice framework. So including voices that are usually not at the table is pretty critical, fundamentally critical to our design. Next slide. Again, nothing new here. So I'm going to try to move through things because we do have a ton of content to review. Everything is full tilt boogie over here at Gravity. There's a lot going on. You can see across each of our work streams, again, coding for food, language barriers, and incarceration status, and program enhancements, all firmly within the Gravity terminology work, hence the weekly meeting cycle that we have through the fall. Next slide. And again, just noting, you'll try to see us do a better job of highlighting when the work that we're doing is aligned with the social care voice co-design initiative that we hosted last summer. We've been working with it as our North Star through many of our activities, but haven't done a very good job showing how that thought process has been through our work. So we're going to try to pull that forward as we go forward, and you'll see very intentional convenings of that in 2025 again, and a kind of an end of the year report coming out shortly as well. Next slide. You can see in the co-design elements in the second half of this, but we did solidify and it's reiterating our terminology concepts for 2025, spring 2025. You know, finally, we were asked to do this a few years ago, and finally leaning into topics in discrimination and chronic stress, and person-level discrimination and chronic stress. And then fall will be topics in food access and neighborhood safety, building out of our food insecurity and housing insecurity domains. And then enhancement works will keep on going with coding for food. We are working with the CDC on enhancements to our housing instability and homelessness data elements, and considering with a great intention, focusing finally on protective factors, as I mentioned in our last meeting. Again, the protective factors, the critical counterbalancing to risk. My tagline is, I am not the sum total of my risk. So looking forward to doing that in 2025. Next slide. All right, so we are entering end-to-end review. So this is now our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th meeting. And I had to count up because it's been a long day. End-to-end review is a period of time where we spend weeks just sitting back and looking at the breadth of what we've created and asking questions. We'll go through what those questions are. But you will see on the slides, in order to ready us for end-to-end review, there's been a significant push of both data elements and definitions for you all to review when the masters are posted on Tuesday. So the reason why there are 70 slides is because there's a lot of new content, and each of those concepts has a definition if we've come to consensus on it with our subject matter experts. And again, just for everyone's reference, any of our programs or concepts has to have a definition to go forward, just so that we have bounds, like conceptual bounds of what it is and what it is not. We'll do this 3 times today, in 2 weeks, and then in 2 weeks again. And hopefully over that period of open end-to-end review where anyone can comment, including anyone who's not here. So if you feel like you want to send the master to someone in your ecosystem, to anyone you feel like whose voice is critical, send it off. And you can represent their comments in our process. And the goal is to get thorough, thoughtful, and careful comments through these next 6 weeks so we can head into the vote on November 21st. Next slide. Again, principles, we don't go anywhere without them. We've been referencing them extensively in our work over the course of the last time, and we'll keep them close as we do all of our work going forward. Next slide. All right, we're going to talk, okay, there again is a fair bit of content. And so we're going to go through, I'm not going to read the definitions, because that would take a very long time. You will have a chance to review the definitions on the master when it's posted on Tuesday. We are trying to support your cross-referencing of any definition with references in the reference section of the Confluence. So if you want to see the data, there's also hyperlinks in the master. But if you want to see the content that allowed us to create a definition where we got it, that's all available to you. And then, so the definitions, we're not going to read them out today unless they're really like critical ones. And we'll look forward to review happening asynchronously when the masters are posted on Tuesday. Next slide. All right, and so this is just noting, because even though we meet in different meetings, it's all intersected. Whenever a gravity gap, program gap that we have identified in our enhancement work is happening here, it's highlighted in purple, just because we're keeping track of all of our enhancements separately, because of our work with CDC and the program enhancements work. So if you see the highlighted in bold and purple, it's one of those enhancement gaps we already found in our program classification work over the summer. Next slide. And I think, yes, the masters are on the Confluence per usual. You will find them now on Tuesday afternoons as opposed to Friday evenings. Next slide. Okay, what is end-to-end review? This is the slide I was excited to get to. So end-to-end review is a time to sit back. We've been thinking very detailed about this concept or that concept. End-to-end review is a time to step back and really consider the whole set and ask questions of it thoughtfully. And as Kwesi said once, slow things down, right? We don't want to stay so firmly in the weeds that we miss the method and the wholeness of how these concepts are able to tell stories. So we step back and we look at the set and we ask if there's concepts that are missing. We ask if there's anything that's incorrect that might need to be changed. Is there something that's unessential? Or in this instance, is there something that's too risky? We've talked about bias a lot in our work. And so these are the concepts that we actually, you'll see us removing things that we didn't feel like were necessary. This me is electing to do that in some of our concepts already today. We simplified things from a point of necessity. So these are the concepts that we ask ourselves as we look at the master lists. And again, you'll see them posted on Tuesday. At this point, even though we've been very informal and talking in meetings, everything that happens here on out, we try to do logs for, because we've done a lot of work to get us here, right? And so if someone has a comment that changes something, we need a rationale and an evidence for why it needs to be different, right? Because we want to respect the collective work we've done here together. And if something is significantly changing the direction, we need to be able to present to the community why that is. Right. So if you have any comments in end-to-end review, they have to be submitted formally to gravityproject@hl7.org. And then anything, because our subject matter experts are grounding everything you see, any question or edit to the master has to be assessed by our subject matter experts prior to changing the concept. And we'll discuss it together here if there's something that is unable to be resolved. Next slide. Oh, any questions? Sorry, go back. I'm sorry, my apologies. I'm a little sleepy today. Any questions on end-to-end review for those of you who've been part of it before? Again, it's and you'll see there's a significant amount of content that will carry us over the end-to-end review cycle over the next 3 weeks. I mean, 3 cycles, 6 weeks. All right, next slide. We're going to start with language barriers and / access, and this is the end-to-end review. Very grateful. Who do we? I think we have some of our SMEs from language access on the call right now. I'm grateful for all of you, and then we'll get into incarceration status next. All right, next slide. Hi, Lisa. All right, I'm just gonna get Lisa into my picture here. There we go. Okay. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, we're having the screen keeps changing.
Sorry, yeah, not anymore.
Okay, so these are our amazing subject matter experts who have guided our work so far. So incredibly grateful. I do want to note that one of our SMEs changed his place in the government since we placed this slide. Right now he's finishing a meeting, but he moved over from the CDC over to the Department of Health and Human Services. So still offering his wisdom on all those concepts, all of his brilliance in a different place. And we're very, very grateful to have him with us. Gerardo, longtime friend of Gravity, congrats, and grateful you're still here. And then we have Alfonso and Julio and Darcy, Marsha Regenstein and Lisa Bothwell, who complete the amazing set of SMEs that we have on this work. Next slide. All right, so this was our initial scoping slide. I left it here just so you can see where we got to, right? If you remember, this is where we started, and we had all of these different concepts, and we were trying to figure out how to go forward. There's been some pretty significant level setting and grounding since this slide. I present it only as a where we started. All of the level setting and grounding you see going forward is our subject matter experts really leaning in thoughtfully to what of these concepts qualifies as something that needs to be identified for an intervention, what qualifies as a problem, what the goals would be for that problem, and what the interventions are. So this is the last time you'll see this slide. It's like a breadcrumb to where we are now, and it will not be here next time we come back. Next slide. So our last few weeks in the SME Master in the meeting, and Lisa, this is I think I'll share it to you too if you want to have a hyperlink to the direct Lucid document, because this might be too small. Just anyone who's having any concerns, I'll try to see if I can get the direct link. But this is a flow chart that we made to try to figure out what the problems were, right? A person's primary language is not a problem, right? And so, and the capacity, a preferred language statement, like my preferred language for healthcare is Armenian, is not a problem, right? So in Gravity, what we lean into is those risks that mean that the system needs to help the person. So again, not perfect, this little flow chart, but it was our attempt at trying to differentiate what a problem was from all of our components. And so out of all of these components, the things in blue are the things that qualify as being a problem-based concept. And they identify the system's problem, the need for the system to meet the person where they are, right? So if you have an individual with limited English proficiency and you have an English primary language care team, if the language of the person is of the preferred language of the person is different than the primary language of the care team, right? These are what concepts of language discordance, which means the system has to lean in and support the person, right? And so out of all of these concepts, when we think about what the intervention is, it's on limited English proficiency and when a person identifies they need an interpreter or they need translation. You'll see this going forward because some concepts that were in kind of the hopper as being in consideration no longer are, and we're focusing on the things that identify needs in important ways. And you can see also some of the goals that we've developed over here. So where are we heading? We're heading towards, again, this is not the exact content of the concepts. This is a general flow sheet. We're heading toward qualified interpretation, which isn't here, timely interpretation, consistent interpretation, and effective communication. And again, all of this is a work in progress, but it did help us identify what of our concerns that we need to develop concepts for and what we did not. And I'm going to show you more details on that as we go forward. If any SME at any time wants to speak, just let me. Oh, Lucy, I can't see Lisa and see hands. So if I wanted to see Lisa, she was talking. So Lucy, yes.
This is a beautiful flow chart. I can imagine the complexity of the conversation that went into this, and I just love this image and find it really easy to follow. And it really helps me to understand what we're doing here. My question is up at the top left, primary language, used to better understand and meet the needs of the, should we say, have you considered saying person stroke family?
Oh,
Because
we do that later on. Lucy, brilliant.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
100%. Yes, exactly, because of missing caregivers. And this is why this is not meant to be like a final thing. But you are so spot on. And Marcia Regenstein was the first person who said that in our SME meeting. The person is not sufficient. And again, the only thing this worked for was to help us lean into the problems, but you're entirely correct. Brilliant, Lucy, per usual. And then for anybody
great,
who
thank you. Well, great minds, Sarah.
Yeah.
There are a lot of great minds present here. Thank you.
Yeah. And for anybody who needs a link directly to the document, I've put that in the chat. That will allow you to expand the view, interact with the view. I put a view only link to the document of reference in the chat. All right, so next slide. And now you can see these concepts get onto these kind of diagnostic concepts, like what we are working on. Next slide. And the definitions. So the reason why limited English proficiency and limited spoken English proficiency are on the same line is with limited English proficiency, the spoken is inferred. We've kind of agreed that it's assumed to be spoken. We have to kind of figure out what our lane is, whether we're going to be choosing limited English proficiency or limited spoken English proficiency. But for right now, they have the same working definition, which is self-identification of speaking anything other than very well. And then this is the definition from the US Census. Same thing with limited written English proficiency and limited reading English proficiency. So these are the concepts, and the definition again is always self-identification. It cannot be imposed on a person. Anyone, if any SME wants to chat, let me know. Next slide. And then these are in here, Lucy, you can see and or a person's caregivers. this language in process, right? So those other concepts, and then what we have is the concepts of the kind of pair and signaled again to the system that something needs to be done. We were very careful to say this interpreter needed is a statement of a care settings need to provide qualified interpretation to support effective communication because of discordance, right? And again, this is in process. The definitions will be worked on in time, but really trying to center from an equity perspective is that the system needs to meet the person in this. And then Lisa, because you mentioned it, we pulled it forward, even though it's not final. Like specifically calling out when ASL interpretation is needed is something that's we're working on as well. We'll of course defer to Lisa on whatever she thinks is best there, but that's something we felt like was necessary based on what she's told us so far. And I saw a thumbs up, I think. Great, fantastic, wonderful. Okay.
Thumbs up.
Great. And then translation needed has that same, it's a care settings need to provide document translation in the person or person caregiver's preferred language, right? So out of the concepts that we had in that scoping, we've narrowed it to a statement of English language proficiency, interpreter needed, ASL interpreter needed, and translation needed, again, centering on the systems need to meet the person. And you'll see this in the definitions on the master on Tuesday. Next slide. Oh, Lucy, another question? Or is
Yeah,
that
Sarah, on the previous slide,
okay? Yes.
are we going to say anything about how this is done? In
Yes.
person, on the phone, on a screen, and
were talking-
also when it is done? Is that
Yeah.
coming up?
Well, absolutely. We started to talk about modalities of interpretation on Friday, 100%. We'll talk
Okay.
more about that, but we were kind of sitting in that and whether or not we felt like it needed to be in this level of concept on Friday. And certainly when it's done is a concept that comes in when we think about our goals, and I hope you see that on the next slides. Lucy is right again, finger on the pulse per usual.
I just want to say that I went into CMS to get a vaccination the other day, and there was a button to push at the window where I registered, "Do you need language assistance?" And there was an enormous list of languages that I could select right in the drugstore.
Great.
So without all of this experience, I never would have noticed that. I have English proficiency and that's the end of it. So I was really impressed and I commented to them how wonderful I thought that was. Okay.
Fantastic. All right, next slide. All right, so our instruments are unchanged. Nothing really changed here. So we're going to breeze through these because this is what was most settled. If we can just, for this, we have 75 slides. So if it's okay, they're here to show you what's on the master. They're not changed. If we can just click through just to the next content, because there's a lot of new content. Nothing new here. Nothing new here. Nothing new. We do promise to present things that you're going to be seeing in the future on the master. So we're doing it again here. Nothing new here. Nothing new here. And nothing new all the way to I speak. Nothing's new. All right. All right. So if we go into goals, this is what, Lucy, where some of that timing comes in, because our subject matter experts led us in a conversation on Friday on when you, like, what are the components of good interpretation, right? So our meta goal might be, it is a concept we're working on called effective communication, and we're leaning on our subject matter experts to help us with that. There's lots of really beautiful definitions for the holistic concept of effective communication. We just need to kind of settle on one that's inclusive of all of the areas of our domain. But what our subject matter experts were very clear about is there is a need for consistent interpretation and timely interpretation and qualified interpretation. And so we are playing around and hashing out some versions of this, but if we were thinking about the goal, it would be that the person receives both consistent, timely, and qualified interpretation. The reason why it's not always coupled is that sometimes the timely concept is relevant for an acute moment, but consistency is relevant for a prolonged duration. Like in primary care, for instance, I always want consistent. I want it to happen every time. I want it every time they come in, like without fail. Whereas if somebody needs interpretation once because of one experience, that is a timely element. But we're hashing all that out as we in our subject matter expert meetings. But this is where we are right now. And again, we are just beginning talking about modalities as well, and more to come over the next 5 weeks or so. But this is, again, our North Star, because whenever we identify a problem, we want to show where we're going. We want to show what success looks like, right? Awesome. Okay. Next slide. Okay. And then this is where we get into there's not a ton new. We just had some missing concepts and some really reflectful comments from our subject matter experts on programs and professions. So this is what we're going to see on the next slides. Next slide. Again, all of the core helpers are always there. And again, they're not on this slide because they're always there. They will be on the master. There is a tab for the ones that are always in the general social determinants of health, like the social workers, the care managers, the community action agencies, all of those helper places that are always relevant, including population-specific ones like AAAs. They're all on this set that rolls over to every domain. We're just elevating that they're very important here, including peer support. And then, patient advocacy. And again, something to know about our work when it comes to professions is right now we're really are bound when we build a profession to build professions, refer to professions that are included in the National Uniform Claim Committee taxonomy. I'll go more into that later. But we do have avenues for advocacy with NUCC. So if we don't have a specific profession in the National Uniform Claim Committee taxonomy, we are advocating for it. And you'll see that over the next slides. I know that was incredibly nerdy, but if sometimes there's not a refer to this profession concept because we can't do it yet, but we're going to be getting it. Next slide. And you'll see definitions for some of the professions from the National Uniform Claim Committee. This is where the brilliance of our subject matter experts was like instantaneous. And Lisa, Marcia, Lisa's on the call. Lisa was her original request. I was like, I think I was in a car when I was trying to facilitate this meeting, was that you don't refer to language interpretation because the person doesn't travel. The interpreter comes to the person. The system provides it, right? And so in the past, actually, Gravity built refer to concepts that really is a request for concept. It's like bring the translation to the system, like to the person, system, enter. And so just in respect, thank you so much, right? So we already have the request for language interpreter service concepts. And we are, elevating the need for a request for document translation service. We did have a conversation how in many instances, the translations we need are not available in the coded languages of the health record. So in rural primary care, I have to request document translation via send out on a regular basis. So again, thank you, SMEs, for holding us accountable to how this happens. It's not sending the person to the translator or translation or interpretation service, it's bringing it to them. So very grateful for that insight. And then next slide. If anyone has any comments, please feel free. Okay, that is the end of the language barriers access updates. And again, we'll be working with our SMEs on some of those modality issues, Lucy, to see if we want to bring them into our concepts. But a lot of great work since we last presented, and the SME master lists. The master list on Tuesday will have everything you see on the slide. And then I don't think there's too many revisions that should happen by then. But thank you, subject matter experts. Anything final to say, SMEs, before we go into incarceration? No? Okay, thank you, Lucy, on the editorial comment. Thank you, friends. Okay, so now we're going to segue and again into incarceration status. Grateful for our subject matter expert, Kwesi, who is going to be guiding us through the ethics and the why. I'll be presenting on content, and then he'll be guiding us through any conversation on how we arrived at things. Again, our amazing subject matter experts, incredibly thoughtful group of subject matter experts who have guided us through the many ethical considerations regarding this domain. Tireless, many hours of work, and just incredibly honored to work with all of them. Next slide. So our core concepts, what we are defining within our incarceration status work, this is going to follow. And then we'll go through updates in goals and programs over the next slides. Next slide. So these, again, the concepts have not changed, but we have working definitions. And something that's really important to note is we were talking about the ethics of language in the last meeting, and you'll see us very carefully removing any stigmatizing language in any of our definitions. Again, this is a work in progress. Our subject matter experts are going to be leaning in carefully to making sure we're doing the best that we can. But you'll see that I'm striking through and offering alternatives, and the SMEs have reviewed most of these when we felt like the language was stigmatizing. Currently is in parentheses because we know, because of the boundaries of SNOMED, that currently concept might be something we have to work with our SMEs to shift. But the currently incarcerated in jail, currently incarcerated in prison, and then the juvenile incarceration concepts are what we are going to be leaning into for the currently incarcerated statuses. Lucy?
I am aware that both federal and state government contract out,
Yes.
and I'm wondering if that needs to be acknowledged here instead of run by the state or federal government. When they contract out, they're not running it. And in fact, they're not monitoring. And in fact, there are terrible scandals going on as a result of that contracting out and lack of monitoring. So is there a way to acknowledge that in these definitions, or is it really not necessary?
Thank you, Lucy, for the question. I would offer that the relationship of a person re-entering into society, I want to be careful about how I say this, whoever the person or entity or agency was that held the person in a carceral space, it may not necessarily be the question. It may be that the person has experienced a carceral experience, period. And the care they're going to receive, therefore, then happens. Is that helpful to you, to your point, Lucy?
You're muted, Lucy, if you're trying to speak.
Yeah, I think what's just been suggested about focusing on the person who is going to need help instead of where they were incarcerated. Like if you deleted the whole sentence in that second cell on the right, prisons are longer term facilities. Prisons are longer term facilities, period. Or maybe facilities for persons sentenced to incarceration for more than 1 year, instead of referring to who runs things. Is that?
That's a valid concern and surface, Lucy. I appreciate the reflective practice here. And I want to be mindful that the goal again is to help the bidirectional relationship between the provider and the human being and the community. So
yes, exactly.
So we want to be mindful that that's our hope, is that's what we're having the individuals get activated as a responsive inquiry as to what to do next. To go down the who and what so much right now may not help us initially. And I do appreciate, Lucy, and it's a practice for me to take back into our meeting on Friday to think that through. I'm just mindful that what you are surfacing, whether or not a federal or state or local agency contracts out to a private provider, there is still an incarceration space. That level of care that the individual may offer to their provider or reflect to a reentry program would surface when that person feels safe enough to talk about how we,
yes,
a group providing care to how we as providers or systems think about this is another space for us to engage. Is that fair, Sarah, to offer a reflection that way?
That's lovely. And I just want to note, Lucy, that very practically, nerdy terminologist, this is a direct quote from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. It's not made up, right? So it's something that is the
No,
way.
nothing is ever made up here.
No,
I know that.
No, I know. So thank you for those thoughts. You're always so thoughtful. And Kwesi, thank you for walking through this. But right now, it's literally a direct quote from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So any edits we make to it are also with that in mind, you know?
I really, I can really follow the who and the what, and the where is really another issue. The where is who's got to understand what we come up with,
Mhm. Thank
I
you, Lucy.
think. Okay,
And Kwesi,
enough that now you all think about it. Thank you.
Lisa, you are unmuted. I don't know if you.
so can I just say one more thing, Kwesi, before we move on? We did talk about how contracting out means that you're not coming into community. That was one thing we raised, Kwesi, early, as Eddie was speaking to how, like, the most salient thing, Lucy, of what you're mentioning is how when a person is removed from community and placed in a contracted facility far away from home, how that is like a significantly inhibits social connection, family connection, and social engagement. So just, I mean,
Definitely.
yeah, so just noting that that maybe there's something important in what you're saying, which is not specifically about the contracting, but about the familial engagement element and the challenges therein. And maybe we'll see that in other concepts in the future. Maybe.
Great. Thank you for thinking about this.
Any other thoughts on this? I mean, God, this domain makes me so emotional. I think we're ready to go to the next slide. If some things are in italics, it means they're kind of in the hopper. So next slide, please. This is a new concept that I want to note was thought really critical from our clinical leads. Again, there was the blessing of all of these, like Kwesi, Milan, Rada, Tyler, Andrea, who directly work in the care of individuals as they both are incarcerated and in the community. And so this concept was thought really critical because, number one, it identifies that critical phase of reentry when you're still incarcerated and we're trying to plan for successful integration back into community and the people you know. And also because it qualifies individuals for specific programs, like if you're a juvenile, it qualifies you perhaps for different programs by regulation, and it might qualify you for the reentry program. So this incarcerated and expected release within 90 days, again, the time frame is something we'll work on, but this is something that the clinical SMEs thought was important. All right, if there's no questions, I'm gonna keep going, and then Kwesi's always here to help ground the answers and this wisdom that is not mine. When we're looking at the recently incarcerated concepts, you'll all remember that we decided to be to not allow time box historical history of incarceration concepts, really leaning into that reentry period rather than recently incarcerated. There's still some conversation to be had among our SMEs. I don't know if this one's entirely landed because some SMEs still feel like reentry is so amorphous a concept that they don't know if it will be like recognized. But it is reentry and waivers to support reentry are definitely the use case that's driving our work, and it's a well-published concept. So we'll finesse this as we go forward. Yes, Lucy, again, that's the why. Lucy, I saw that article. Yeah, so it's the, trying to address historical healthcare access and social needs problems with incarcerated individuals and structural bias, that this reentry waiver is a concept. So we'll see how where we land, but right now this is where we are and more to come. Next slide. So this is all gone. This is no more. I wanted to show everybody. So actually, if we can stay there for 1 second and not, the reason why I'm going to stay here for a second is, when I mentioned that we pruned to what was necessary, this is a really good example of that. Right? So in it, end-to-end review is about considering what we need and sometimes taking out things that we don't need. So when our SMEs sat together and thought about telling stories of people who were entering community, they realized this level of granularity was not required. They didn't feel like they needed to tell the story, and they felt like with the risk of bias, they wanted to do something different. Next slide. Okay, so here is where they landed, and again, grateful for our SMEs on the call. But the idea that you don't need to know whether it's prison or jail or what, and trying to minimize stigmatizing language as well as they could. So we have in reentry from carceral facility in the past 2 weeks, and again, those concepts, 2 weeks, 3 months, and 12 months are the consistent themes, and then working on definitions as we go forward. But this is what the complexity of the last slide was simplified again from a necessary storytelling perspective. Any questions on this? Hope it feels like a good move. All right, let me see here. Okay, next slide. And then the same thing, right? What needs to be said? And then the same concept applied to the juvenile facility. All right, there's no questions. I'm gonna keep on going because it is 4:46. Like I'm always like balancing things. A new concept is the history of solitary confinement concept. This is again raised by our subject matter experts who take care of people and felt like they needed this concept to represent critical stories. This is based on the significant risk of solitary confinement to health. And then, so it was thought important to create this as a relevant health factor. There are a lot of resources on the hazards of solitary confinement and the inequity to which it's applied. It is sobering reading. The Urban Institute report and the Government Accountability Office are like fierce, thoughtful, compelling reads, and they really underwrite the why of why this is necessary. They really detail the effects of solitary confinement on psychological and physiological health. So those will be available in the master and on the Confluence for further reading. Definition to be determined. Yeah, so Lucy, that's what we're working on, right? Is the reentry as a concept of reentering from incarcerated settings is something that's pretty grounded in the literature. It has a few other applications, but it also means something for the use case here. And Kwesi, I don't know if you want to speak to it, but
The significance of why we've, as a society, has moved from parole and, let's say, probation to reentry, in so much as a person's leaving one space and reentering into society as a new entity from something else, allows that person to dictate where they're going to reenter to. That's not up to the provider to dictate that. That's something up to the individual and the supports that they have.
so Lucy, we're working on that, but it is the concept of the hour, and again, it's a very person-centered concept, like Kwesi was just stating, and I get an education every day.
To the point of to kind of center why the history of solitary confinement could be very impactful to many people is there is an overt awareness of how individuals are inundated with what solitary confinement may mean versus the experience of the individual and how that relationship with the provider in that therapeutic moment happens. So we want to be mindful that the provider may have context, may not. However, it's an activation of care in so much as solitary confinement could be in some ways for some people from a military space versus just a carceral space. And we want to be sensitive to that relationship happening and being thoughtful about what happens next.
Thank you, Kwesi. Any other questions? We're doing pretty good. Next slide. And Sarah, thanks for putting the links in here. Next slide. I didn't do a very good job of feeling this last time, but again, we were very careful. We have a lot of accountability in our subject matter expert group, right? So an early decision was to roll up all community supervision concepts into one subtype, because it was not thought necessary to detail all the ways people are held in community or monitored in community, right? So I think, Jonathan, you asked a question regarding house arrest before. It goes, right? Because we want to allow that person to be as in community as possible. So in community supervision was the general concept. It was the only one people were comfortable putting in. And you can see again, striking with SME's guidance, anything that is stigmatizing language, right? And so we'll work on these as we go forward. And then want to note that we are in a process of discernment regarding the specialty courts, treatment courts, and problem-solving courts. You know, this means it may settle on just one concept. I want to note that there is beautiful, extensive literature, including the treatment court guidelines from All Rise that we have that is grounding our work, the best practice guidelines. So this might be settled by the time the master's post on Tuesday, but right now this is where we're kind of in this those three italics or something that we're figuring out, and more to come on that. But again, the All Rise documentation is beautiful and very promising. Any questions on this slide? I'm just trying to follow. Thank you, Sarah B. Oh, yeah, so Kwesi, can you respond to Lucy there? Correctional facilities is kind of an inclusive term. Any thoughts on that?
So Lucy, go ahead if you want to say something. I can.
Yeah, I find it a euphemism. Like, who's being corrected to do, who's being corrected and who defines what needs correcting. So I find the term correctional facilities to be a euphemism coming from the people who have always thought these are a necessity and have actually defined what they do. So I'm just wondering about that term, and is it okay with our SMEs to use that term?
So thank you, Lucy. And if you notice in the box, the change is the supervision of individuals convicted of criminal charges in a resident population as opposed to confinement in correctional facilities. So we are trying to offer, to your point, want to be mindful of language and what's already provided for us to use. Correctional facilities, although not the term that many people feel is helpful because it's a unidirectional idea, it's also available to us to use. As we surface more, do we want to delineate? We're again going back into how much delineation is necessary for us to help and provide for the person that we are focused on. So that person, that human being is going to notice what they need. If we delineate jail to prison, I can offer to you, many people I work for have a reaction when you delineate that in terms of like a hierarchy of what's more or less. So we're trying to focus, again, I'm centering your reflective practice here, Lucy, because it is important for us to continue to think that through and to be mindful. And we want to also offer the complexities around how granular we become.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Again, the great thing is we have 6 weeks. So these definitions are here and are really, we are in such good hands with our SMEs, and really grateful for the questions that you're raising here. And we have a fair bit of time to make sure that they represent the ethics and the purpose that we need. Next slide. And again, this is just simplified because we kind of settled on what's on the next slide. I presented last time the concept of legal needs. I want to note that in my searching for references, I found references across the whole world. It was one of those where I was like, everyone has this concept. So it was actually really comforting to find not just MLPs using it, but the OECD was talking about legal needs. So it's a really like an evidence-based, consistent practice for us to focus on and elevate in our work. And you'll see some outcomes on the next slides. Next slide, because we settled on the language there. So now we have, we presented in our kickoff the intersection between incarceration and social risks. I want to really thank, I think it was actually 100% Kwesi, who elevated that as we were trying to explore barriers between, incarceration and associated social risks, that legal involvement was not necessarily always a bad thing, that legal is advocacy too. So the legal needs concept really allows us to tell stories that are important to people and think about the how do I help, as opposed to what your history is. It's like, what do you need now? You need me to advocate for you in legal ways, and I will do so. So incredibly grateful to settle on this and for the trigger to go there, because before we were kind of in a quagmire. But this is where we're settling. And there's precedent in the transportation and food insecurity and other concepts where we know the intersection of risks is the story we need to tell. Lucy?
What about voting?
Oh.
Legal needs affecting voting.
Love it. Brilliant.
Thank
Voting,
you.
voting as a social need. Yeah, 100%. I see Kwesi nodding. So consider that an informal end-to-end review comment that you don't have to send an email about, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing like being self-evident, then I don't have to work on it. Okay.
All right. Any other thoughts? All right, next slide. Okay, so this is a big update. Next slide. There are no good screening instruments for history of incarceration. It's not the story we're trying to tell. It's not the way we're trying to help. And so we have removed them all. So there's no evidence on perceptions of screening for histories of incarceration. There's no instrument that's validated for this purpose, right? And the risk is too great. So we removed them all. There is no screening instrument, because it's not the history. It's like we want to find out what people need and how we can help them. We don't need to put them in a box. So this is one of our first no screening of instruments apply. I do want to note that this has triggered our brilliant subject matter experts to have all kinds of research project ideas. I keep on getting emails about, validating types of screeners, patient perceptions of screening. So just know there's research to come. And so we are an iterative project. And if there are instruments in time, we will come back. But right now there are not. And I just want to note, okay, Lisa, bye. I want to note as well that person-centered assessment has always been the goal for us. Bye. It's always been that an instrument is an instrument, and it's confirmed in conversation and with consent and the person as part of the process. That's why it's a social need, right? So this is not incongruous with our approach in the past. Next slide. Lucy. All right, these goals. Next slide. This is to be determined a little bit. There's a lot of things that the SMEs know that I meet with them on Friday, and then on Saturday morning I go running and I run along the lake and I have epiphanies and I put them on the SME master. This is my pattern. There are some really lovely goals coming. But the thing we want to note is that we haven't finalized them with the SMEs, so we don't feel comfortable putting them on the master yet. But we're working on pulling in specific goals for the problem statements and the purposes of the screening. So all of those legal needs concepts. that leads us to our social need domains, like housing instability, homelessness, like housing security, stably housed, like all of those concepts we've worked on over the past. So those will bloom over the course of the next weeks. And if they make it, if tomorrow everyone's like, these are great, I think given that most of them have been seen before, we'll just put them on the master for your review on Tuesday. But this is just emerging. But you should recognize a lot of, if they make it to the master, you'll recognize lots of lovely concepts used to tell critical stories. Next slide. And okay, next, and then this is a series of programs. We're doing pretty good on time. It's only 5 o'clock. Chrissy. Okay, I know. Okay. All right, so these are our interventions. And some really, I mean, again, we'll put all these references, you can be able to see them, but these programs that are elevated are pretty powerful. And there's some more that we haven't come to consensus on that aren't here yet, but shows a lot of great work and really honored to participate in. Next slide. Same thing as before. So Lucy, I noted your comment on universal from the other slide. Thank you. We'll consider it. Words matter. As you know, I'm a terminologist. So, just want to note again that ever so critical are those programs that are always present. You'll see them on the master, you know, again, social workers, you know, medical legal partnerships, you know, non-attorney legal advocates, legal aid, like all of those helpers that we've always had are really ever so critical in this work. And so you'll see them there. So in addition to this, though, there are specific programs that came out of our work with our subject matter experts. We'll detail over the course of the next slides. Next slide. So some of these you saw before in the meetings before, but they have definitions now. So we have the community-based reentry program with a definition, the Department of Veteran Affairs Veterans Justice Outreach Program, which bizarrely was not part of our veterans program where we defined with the VA social work division. We thought every core program in the VA suite, which apparently we did not. And then halfway house. And the reason why that's purple is because it's a type of residence, and it also came up in our enhancements work. And so therefore it relates to that purple thing. I said, if there's intersections, we're trying to bring it up. But this came in our CDC housing concepts. It also came up in our program classification work, and it's also come up here. So this halfway house is the Venn diagram of all the things. And again, all of these have references. Sometimes it's from SAMHSA, sometimes it's from the VA, sometimes it's from, you know, the Department of Justice. Again, just noting, I think, do we have other, we have this, Eddie is on the call too. Eddie, hi Eddie. I was trying to see.
Hey.
Hi Eddie. He's one of our wonderful subject matter experts who's really, I don't know if you heard me call out to you when I was talking about your storytelling regarding the significance of being moved far from home earlier in incarceration. We were talking about that anyway.
No, I did hear that.
Okay. I was thinking of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I very much appreciate that too.
Okay. All right. Next slide. All right. So these, again, are programs that support social, family, and parental connection. And there's a slight edit here because we had a concept, there was a question on the last slide last time regarding where mentoring happens. And Rada at the time mentioned the work of transition clinics. And you know, that's a concept that's not here yet because it hasn't been reviewed. It's on the SME master, it might come in soon. 48 states, you know, it's disseminated. It's this concept we'll talk more about later. But the interesting thing is that forensic peer support is a constant, and usually not a constant, it is a theme in each of those transition clinics, right? So I incorrectly put current incarceration within the definition of forensic peer support, but forensic peer support is not just regarding current incarceration. And so it is, and Quexy nothing, so I hope I'm not. So in that concept, someone raised the question about where mentoring happens. Rada raised transition clinics. Who's in transition clinics? Forensic peer support specialists, right? Because they offer lived experience and mentor and support that person entering community throughout the process. Quexy, did I say, was that correct? Okay, whew, okay. So the mentoring question went on it was like, I went on this little journey and I was like, oh, it's here. Okay, Lucy?
What about small academic-based or nonprofit programs established to support people who are incarcerated, to support people shortly being discharged, and support people once they're out?
If we
Is
go
that
back, that should be the community-based reentry program. Right there, that's the top one.
Thank you, Lucy. So community-based transition programs or community-based reentry programs and also community-based transition clinics speak to the concept that you are surfacing in the present. So
Thank you.
a
Okay.
transitional clinic, as Sarah's mentioning, is something that the literature has to almost like approve that that's happening. A colleague of mine, and Milan and Rada know her very well, she developed a clinic here in Rochester, New York, that started out as an academic research initiative, which is now a full clinic. And residents and clinicians all volunteer at this transitions clinic, and it sits within a need-based hospital. And now we also have some medical students and residents who started another transitions clinic, which is focused on dental care, eye care, and they're going to add in TBI screening. So some of these things fall into reentry, and that's the rubric of how they are created. And the transitions piece is going to come.
That's great. Thank you. I was thinking specifically of Kathy Boudin and what she discovered once she was imprisoned and how she organized first within the prison to make sure that women were treated better than they had been. And of course, once she was released, she went into the School of Social Work, I think, at Columbia, and developed a very comprehensive approach. That's just the word I'll use, a very comprehensive approach to helping women subject to incarceration in America. And when she died, there was a huge memorial service, and many women spoke very movingly about how a program like that or an approach like that can really change their lives. So if all that is included here, community-based, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. And Nicole, your point is very salient as well, in so much as the parenting classes or supervised visitation status, aggression or anger management, and domestic violence prevention programs do fall within that rubric, and that's something we're going to discuss further tomorrow. I think that it's really important to acknowledge and center that, and that specifically being what's the language that encompasses these areas of concern, because oftentimes how a parole officer or probation officer suggests that an individual has reentry guidelines may be very different from how the provider, the clinician, is working with that human being. Does that make some sense to everybody? So somebody can be in the care of that person and being able to discuss, well, I have to go do this thing, albeit, let's say, anger management, and I'm struggling with that because of X. So how we center the language to create more activation on what we do next is really part of the goal of ensuring that we come back to all of you and think this through with you. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Chrissy. And then Nicole, I don't know. So last time I presented my beloved Burlington Community Justice Center in my little teeny hometown that does a lot of those things, right? It gets money as a community-based reentry program for the federal government. It offers a lot of those services. And then Kwesi, he's right. So because Transitions Clinic is like a unique thing that combines healthcare, we'll talk about that tomorrow. And then because Rada elevated that and I put it on this Me Master, but a lot of those programs, the community-based reentry program is a comprehensive concept, but over the next slides, we'll also talk about some specific concepts that Nicole mentioned as well. Because the SME has told us they matter. Next slide. All right. Okay. Like here. And coming further. So there are specific programs that are that have been elevated in this work. And again, forensic peer support is there. I think I might be there twice because I was making slides. That really focus on social, family, and parental connections. There's a couple new ones that our SMEs put on. The SME Master, we'll talk about them tomorrow. But the prison doula program, which supports pregnant and birthing individuals when they're incarcerated and after incarceration. I mean, when they're pregnant and after they have birthed their child. And then there's parenting while incarcerated programs. Again, all of these are programs that are supported through federal programming and are manifested in all kinds of different ways across the ecosystem. My local incarcerated setting has a program called Kids Apart. And it is a completely nonprofit facilitated program to have as much parent-child engagement with incarcerated individuals as they possibly can throughout the duration of their incarceration, like regular visitation, like lots of engagement, lots of programming, and it's lovely, and it's run by my friend Jess Kell, and I love her. Oh, right, thank you, Lucy. We'll think about that. All right, next slide. We also want to note that there's a couple slides of programs that our SMEs, because if it's not perfectly evident, our SMEs really care about the holistic human nature of people and how to heal and help them. And so when they were suggesting programs, it was not just regarding, it's like, how do we help them and their needs, right? Thinking really broadly. And so there are some things that come here in our program list that are not bound to incarceration, but they're pretty helpful because our SMEs are caring, helpful people. That includes recovery housing. And for the first time, believe it or not, I was surprised. I know with the Community Mental Health Center, a designated agency, which is the entity that addresses mental behavioral health in by federal regulation. So those are two new concepts, not exclusive to this domain, but elevated by our SMEs. And designated agency is just a synonym, which is why it's in parentheses, but it's Community Mental Health Center through regulation. Next slide. And I just want to, here, I can't help, but as a rural practitioner, I rely heavily on anything that is federally supported because there's nothing else. I work in a federally qualified health center. I coordinate with my community mental health center. I can coordinate with, Head Start or my community action agency. There's nothing else. And so those critical, equity-based access concepts that are supported by federal regulation are super, super critical. We also want to note that, again, from that family perspective, Nicole, you were raising family concepts in your quote, that there's some pretty critical administration of children and families programs. So if anyone notices a theme, ACF and ACF programming is throughout all of our social care programs because they take care of children and families. This is in utility and security with LIHEAP and LIWAP and community action agencies. It's here with family reunification and family strengthening programs. So just know the core mission of ACF to support families is, you'll see that throughout our programs across all of our work. And I just spent my day in the ACF office, so I made sure I told everyone I saw. So again, these are not just bound to histories of incarceration, but they're very, very critical. Next slide. Doula, that is, again, you'll see that's that NUCC concept. So, so we can refer to an incarceration program, a doula program that focuses on incarcerated individuals, but I can't refer to anything but a doula, right? So I'm a nurse practitioner, you refer to me, right? So doula is the profession that's defined. So that's a concept that we haven't had yet, and the definitions from the NUCC. And I'm grateful that we brought that into our work. Next slide. And then this is the sequential intercept model. It's always the close. those are all of our new concepts and definitions for incarceration. The only next thing is the cross-domain work. Any thoughts, final reflections? I hope you see the incredibly thoughtful work of our SMEs on those concepts and their definitions. There might be
Sorry,
a few.
could you go back to that last slide with the chart?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. This is the sequential intercept model. It kind of grounds some of our why. And so, and we, it was originally presented as like one of the first meetings I ever had with Radha Milan. And it's from SAMHSA, and it comes throughout most of what we do. It's like how to, the best practices and across the intercepts are full of whys for why this work is important. Who do we want to share information with? Where are the stories? So it's on our Confluence, and Sarah Bahal's instantly sharing it. All right. Okay, Nicole, anything else?
No.
Yeah, it was a grounder for what concepts we needed to create, and we return to it on a regular basis. All right, next slide. All domain revisions, no, nothing new there. Next slide. I'm gonna keep because I want to close on the homework. I brought this slide back. Next slide, because it's like the what's next. Lucy's the only thing that's exempt is the legal needs affecting voting rights or voting access concepts. Lucy, that does not need a comment. I heard you, and so did Kwesi. All other comments on the master that's going to be posted on Tuesday need to be formally sent via email to gravityproject@hl7.org. Again, reflect on these things. Is something missing? Is something incorrect? Is something unnecessary? And this is where I highlighted, we already did that pruning when it came to our recently, like our reentry concepts, right? We pruned down to what's necessary. Again, send those to gravityproject@hl7.org. We'll integrate them after review with our subject matter experts. This is the beginning of our end-to-end review process. Again, over the next 3 meetings, we'll be doing this thoughtful reflection on like sitting back and looking at the whole. Any SMEs have any final thoughts before we go to our, no? Okay, next slide. Homework's changed. The homework is send your end-to-end review comments in, review any content on this, on the Confluence. You can look at references we have there for you, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bessie, thank you for helping. Bye.